we talk about the reporting that happened with the two guys that trolled the journalists and pretended to be fired employees? Because I actually thought that was such an interesting moment this week that all the journalists immediately parroted it because it fed their narrative. But there was no fact-checking done. There was no reporting done. And then several of them, including, I think, Deirdre Bosa from CNBC, came out and publicly apologized for that report. And if folks listening aren't familiar with what happened, these two guys came out, they pretended to be fired Twitter employees on Monday, walked out with a box, held a Michelle Obama book up, and they were like, hey, we just got fired. It's terrible. Life is awful.
No, it's even worse.
My husband and wife, one guy's name was Rahul Ligma, and the other guy's name was like Mike Johnson. So the whole thing was Ligma Johnson. So now here's what's so funny about due diligence. Hold on. I read this story without giving away that punchline to my kids. All of my kids immediately started howling. They're like, Dad, if you say these two names are Ligma Johnson. And I was like, oh my God. And so, when preteens can figure this out, but the journalism industry could not, is kind of a very telling sign.
Freeberg made the key observation, which is they didn't figure it out because they didn't want to, because it fit their narrative. So they don't fact check things that fit their narrative.
This was my point about journalism. It was so poignant to me this week when this happened, particularly as it relates to Twitter and the importance of, call it open journalism or citizen journalism, and the integrity of kind of, of the voices that we all kind of trust as our kind of journalistic authorities, that these guys came out and they were conned right outside Twitter's offices into telling a story that fit their sensational narrative. And it was really a kind of poignant moment for me.
Well, do you remember that story? I think it was originally in Rolling Stone, and then Rachel Maddow amplified it, where it was in Oklahoma City, where supposedly all these MAGA Republicans were eating horse paste because Trump told them to. And this is basically, they thought it was like a COVID therapy. And then they were going to the emergency rooms of all the hospitals, and then they were turning away heart attack victims because there were so many of these people going to the emergency room. Anyway, it all turned out to be like a made up story, like a hoax, but the media reported it because the story was too good, right? It fit too many of their preconceptions, too many of their priors.
Also there's another vector, Sachs, which is live coverage is, you really have to be careful, because when doing live, people will call in and say, oh, they're at the scene of an accident. And then they will do a Baba Booey or whatever, kind of charades. And so without fact checking and without saying, hey, we haven't confirmed this yet, but these two employees are claiming this, people want to get real-time coverage. It's fine to do real-time coverage. I think everybody in the audience has to understand. You're giving them so much credit. What about the copy editor? There was a picture and it said Ligma Johnson, and the copy editor went with it. There was a worse one. Come on.
No,
that is so lazy.
Jason, why are you covering for these people?
I'm not covering. I'm just trying to explain.
You're missing the point.
Let me unpack the whole point. Let me unpack the whole point. There's also...
You interrupted me.
Well, here's the thing. There is a different standard for live news coverage. And then we've ripped out fact-checking from a lot of these publications. And basic fact-checking and a little bit of time, I'm explaining why they make this mistake. I'm not protecting them.
You want to know why
the reason
they
make it, that's part of it, but they've also ripped out fact-checking, and then they are in such a race to get the clicks on social media.
No. Here's what's going on. If the story fits their priors, they run with it immediately, and they don't do any fact-checking because they don't want to know that it's not true. That's what's going on.
There is an element of that, yes.
They will fact-check a story if it's a narrative they don't like, because they're gonna try and make sure it's not true.
Yeah, that's true of both sides, and they'll use proxies as well.
You're both siding this thing. There's only one mainstream media. This is the mainstream media. Who's the alternative? What's the alternative? Substack?
Fox is the number one news network.
The alternative to the mainstream media is the Substack journalists. You think Substack journalists do this? Tell me the writer on Substack who behaves this way.
There's a lot of different ones there. So who
got fooled? What Substack writer got fooled by Ligma Johnson?
Okay.
No, seriously, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi.
I'm not defending it. I'm explaining.
Did Matt Taibbi get fooled by Ligma Johnson? I don't think so.
I'm not defending it. Don't make me defend Ligma. I'm not defending Ligma.
Well, you're both sidesing it.
I'm not both sidesing it. I'm telling you what is happening in journalism today. They have ripped out fact-checking, and they are in a race to beat each other because the first person to get the story up gets the clicks. That's the dysfunctional thing.
They tried to create a story when there was no story there.
I agree with that as well.
They went and camped out outside of an office, mid-Market Street, and they said, hey, there's this sensational thing happening. And there was no sensational thing happening.
Correct.
And so the little drop that fell into their laps, the little thing that fell into their laps became the story because that's the story they wanted to see created. There was no story beforehand that there were all these people being fired, walking out with boxes, and then they said, let's go send live TV producers down there. They sent the live TV producers down there,
they
and then
did the
story
same thing.
was manifest.
Yeah. They did the same thing in New York at Bear Stearns.
There was no story to cover.
When they had other major layoffs at Bear Stearns and stuff like that during the financial crisis, of course they sent people to do live coverage there. Not defending it, I'm just explaining to you what's going on in the background as well with live TV and the gutting of newsrooms and having no fact checking. A lot of these stories go out.
But what about the copy
20 years
editor?
ago, they used to have
Guys,
fact checking.
My 11-year-olds and 10-year-old
the copy
kids
editor
are better copy editors than these adults at these
it's crazy.
incredible publications. My kids started howling. They were like, Dad, do you understand what you just said? It'll Ligma Johnson.
Well, I mean, also,
come on. This is like prepubescent humor that these people fell for. It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing.
It's certainly embarrassing. Yeah, 100%.
It is embarrassing. And this connects with the 4chan board. It's the same problem. This is a grievance industrial complex, right? They're manufacturing grievances. It's funny in the case of Ligma and Johnson. It's not funny in the case of the 4chan board. But these are people who are inventing stories because there's a certain
to manipulate
narrative.
Media. Yeah.
To manipulate media because they know it's so easy to manipulate the media.
Right.
Anyways, big shout out to Rahul Ligma. That was a great stunt. Well played, sir.
Also happens to be a huge fan of the All In podcast, apparently.
Well played, sir.
He's welcome on as a bestie guestie anytime he wants.
Oh, no.
Well played.
Definitely not. Please.
Well played.